On this program, we've been discussing the growing church abuse scandal. Now, it all flared up again after a Pennsylvania grand jury report found that the Catholic Church covered up abuse by over 300 priests over several decades, with more than 1,000 victims that were identified just in Pennsylvania. Now, we've discussed whether other states may follow suit, and now they have. The attorneys general of New York and New Jersey have just issued subpoenas for all dioceses in their states. Several other states have also opened up their investigations. And we wanted to bring back Marci Hamilton for more. She's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and also CEO of Child USA. And she's the author of Justice Denied: What America Must Do to Protect Its Children. And along with others, it was her loud voice that got the latest investigation in Pennsylvania underway. And we've seen some of the tragic findings. Marci, when we last spoke, you said that the case in Pennsylvania may begin an avalanche of other states joining suit. And you were proven correct here. You also said it would have been better if the federal government actually got involved in this, but at least states are. New York, New Jersey, and other states, including the Midwest and red states and blue states, there seems to be a domino effect here that came out of Pennsylvania.
It's really been remarkable. All of these years we've been talking about these issues, but this report, after a lot of people had thought that the bishops were just simply taking care of it, has changed the discourse. And so now New York, New Jersey, Missouri, Nebraska, many states are now saying, well, we need to know what's been happening in our state, and it's a tidal change that we needed.
To that end, I see that Bishop Malone out of Buffalo, he's apologized, says he won't resign. Is there still a lack of really understanding on the part of the church that yes, it's a problem, but an apology won't make it go away? Even the idea of statute of limitations. This is going to see the daylight here, and if they paid attention to Pennsylvania, it's not going to go away by itself here, that it's out there now, and they need another tack to address it, because being dragged kicking and screaming to get the facts on the table, it just confirms the worst suspicions.
Well, that's right. And what's unfortunate is the lack of leadership in the church for taking responsibility. It is not enough to say we're sorry. It's not enough to have healing and forgiveness. Those are wonderful Christian values. But what is needed here is justice. Until the bishops take the position that these victims deserve justice, whether they were abused in the church or the home or anywhere else, they are not going to find their way out of this very dark hole that they've dug for themselves. This is their choice. They know what needs to be done. So long as they lobby against the victims, you're going to hear a lot of apologies and not any action.
You know, Marci, what struck me, and I didn't mention in our last interview, was I remember when the initial explosion of allegations against the church of abuse came to light years ago. I interviewed Cardinal McCarrick. He was a leading voice in the church. He was somebody they put out there to talk about this. And obviously, as we saw in the Pennsylvania case, I mean, he not only was involved directly as an abuser, he created an environment where it was fostered, permitted, even aided. And the church put him out, knowing the allegations against him. They still don't get it, you get the sense.
The cynicism of the leadership in the church is pretty deep. They continue to be governed by public relations firms and their lawyers instead of a genuine call to human rights and dignity. What we're dealing with here is individuals who have laid traps for children to be sexually abused, and for many of them have engaged in this behavior themselves. Yet they still tend to say, we're the leaders, you must defer to us. For me, what this all shows us is that lawmakers must dissociate from the bishops. On this issue, the lawmakers must make their own minds up. The bishops cannot be trusted with the protection of children, and until all of these investigations are done, we won't have the full story, but I think we know enough of what's in those secret archives to really understand what's going to come out regardless.
And let's speak to those secret archives, because Dole in New York could be sitting on a powder keg here. You mentioned before they've kept records. They've refused to let them see the light of day. But with the subpoenas that Ms. Underwood's, have in hand for all the archdioceses in New York, and this applies obviously to New Jersey and beyond, but the idea that, come make me get, reveal these documents, well, that day is here. And it's going to be, I think, and I say this as a Catholic, it's going to be devastating for the church in New York.
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, really, fewer than 100 priests have been named. And by all accounts, if you compare the rest of the dioceses in the United States and abroad, there are probably 500 or 600 names in their files. So, they had a choice. In 2002, when Spotlight series came out, when we learned about the Boston Archdiocese, all of the leadership in the church understood that that could happen to them. They could have at that point said, you know what, mea culpa, we're wrong. Here are the lists. Let us do what we can, do the right thing. Instead, they've held them close. They have fought the victims tooth and nail, and they've paid lobbyists millions to block the victims. You don't win that game ultimately, and unfortunately for them, they're about to find out what it's like when other people reveal your secrets rather than you do.
Now, we've talked finally, Marci, about how statute of limitations are antiquated right now and victims can't seek some of the proper justice, but that doesn't always work civilly here. Does this have the potential, as this expands now into the 6 states we mentioned and maybe even beyond, to bankrupt the church in America?
So what they argue is that they will be bankrupt if, in fact, they're made to pay for the suffering of the victims. Because what these lawsuits do is they shift the cost from the victim to the ones who caused it. This whole bankruptcy talk is fog. The reality is that they are the largest landowner in the United States. They do not suffer when these lawsuits are brought. And in fact, a very modest number of lawsuits are brought. At Child USA, we've been studying this for quite a long time, and the reality is it's a modest number of victims, but we learn a lot from the lawsuits that are filed. They're not going to go bankrupt in the sense they're going to have no assets. What they're going to do, in all likelihood, is to file for voluntary bankruptcy so they can reorganize their assets and so they can force every victim to come forward. That's very different from having no assets. So they are perfectly comfortable lying to the American people about the real impact of this kind of legislation, but the facts tell us it's not only not devastating to the courts, it's not devastating to the church, but it's empowering to the victims, and for everyone else, they learn who the hidden predators are. It's vitally needed, regardless of all their talk about bankruptcy.
Marci Hamilton, keep up the good fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And up next, as we get ready to commemorate 9/11, 17 years after those awful terror attacks, an alarming new report is out that shows 9/11 deaths are still rising and illnesses from Ground Zero continue to take more lives.